Hello, this is the first part of the first section of a long essay I published in 2004 on the Baha'i Faith in the West, this one dealing with the initial establishment of the Baha'i Faith up to about 1921. I will have to leave out the tables and footnotes for all of these videos, which were in the original article, so if you want to refer to those, you'll have to consult the actual Kalimat volume. I'll give the link below the video. The actual article is The Baha'i Faith in the West, a survey of my book, The Baha'is in the West, a part of Kalimat's Studies in the Babi and Baha'i Religion series. Also relevant is, for these first two videos, is a long essay I wrote in 1982 on the American Baha'i Community from 1894 and 1917. I'll again give the reference in the notes below the video. So the period up to 1921 is quite complex, and I've divided it into two separate videos. In the first one, we'll talk about the Kheiralla period from 1894 to 1900, the Baha'ists, and Abdul Baha's leadership. And then in the second part, we'll talk about the question of organization, Abdul Baha's visit to North America in 1912, the war years, and activities outside the United States. So first of all, the Kheiralla period. The Kheiralla period, which we could date from 1894 to 1900, is very important because we see the establishment of the Baha'i movement in the United States. It was primarily the work of one man, Ibrahim George Kheiralla, who was a Syrian Christian who had only recently become a Baha'i when he migrated to the United States in 1892. Establishing himself in Chicago, he began to organize classes on the Baha'i religion in 1894. These classes presented Kheiralla's own highly syncretic version of the Baha'i teachings. The classes were pervaded by an aura of mystery, and the name of the new religion was not made public. Only after attending a series of graduated lectures were students told the secret pith of Kheiralla's teachings, that God had appeared in the person of Baha'u'llah, and that his son Abdul Baha was the return of Jesus Christ and was now living in Akka in the Holy Land. Converts were required to write a confession of faith to Abdul Baha and were told God's greatest name, a form of the Arabic word Baha, meaning glory, as a means by which they could enter into a special relationship with the divine. I should note that Abdul Baha himself denied this idea of Kheiralla, that he was the return of Christ. This mixture of Adventist and esoteric ideas, combined with Kheiralla's own forceful personality, was sufficient to attract a growing number of followers. And by 1900, there were perhaps 1,500 or so American Baha'is. Given the extreme geographical mobility of Americans at this time, these early Baha'is were scattered across 60 localities in 25 states. There were also a few converts in Canada, Britain, and France. The three largest groups in the US were in Chicago, New York City, and Kenosha, Wisconsin. The new Baha'i community was socially and religiously diverse, but the majority were native English-speaking middle-class white Protestants. Women outnumbered men. Kheiralla occupied a pivotal role in the network of early American Baha'is. He was the movement's beloved teacher, and despite the emergence of secondary leaders and a limited organization, Kheiralla's overall leadership remained unchallenged. This situation changed radically following Kheiralla's protracted pilgrimage to Akka with a group of Western Baha'is in 1898-99. Accounts vary, but it seems likely that Kheiralla was reluctant to accept Abdul Baha's absolute authority. There were important doctrinal differences between the two men also, and Kheiralla appears to have wished to maintain his dominant position among the American Baha'is. Whatever the exact motivation involved, Kheiralla found his leadership challenged by some of his fellow pilgrims after his return to the United States in May 1899. A dispute gradually developed, and in March 1900, Kheiralla publicly declared his doubts about Abdu'l-Baha's authority as Baha'u'llah's successor. A distinguished Iranian Baha'i teacher, Abdul Karim Tehrani, was sent by Abdu'l-Baha to ensure the loyalty of the American Baha'is. An open breach ensued, Kheiralla denouncing Abdu'l-Baha in favor of his dissident, disaffected half-brother, Mirza Muhammad Ali. Dismayed or confused by the bitter dispute, many adherents abandoned the movement. The remainder split into two separate and mutually hostile organizations, a Baha'i majority, loyal to Abdu'l-Baha, and a Baha'ist minority who followed Kheiralla and Muhammad Ali. Some individuals fluctuated between the two groups. So, talking about the Baha'ists, after the schism, the Baha'ist group fared poorly, rapidly declining in numbers, so that by 1906 they were reduced to a congregation of 40 persons in Kenosha, a small group in Chicago, and a scattering of individuals elsewhere. There were subsequent attempts to expand the movement, but these were unsuccessful. The Kenosha group continued its activities, however, until the early 1950s, but the Baha'is evidently lacked the dynamism of the mainstream Baha'is. Despite Kheiralla's undoubted charm and personal attraction, it seems likely that his denial of Abdu'l-Baha's leadership and authority removed a key element from the appeal of his teachings. Kheiralla had taught that Abdu'l-Baha was the return of Christ, a status which Abdu'l-Baha emphatically denied, and it was to Abdu'l-Baha, now seen as the master by the Baha'is in America, that the majority of the American Baha'is had given their allegiance. Subsequent changes in their theological understanding of his station did not alter that basic allegiance, and it was this group of Baha'is loyal to Abdu'l-Baha who remained the dynamic survivors of the early Baha'i movement in America. The stabilization of the American Baha'i movement after the shock of Kheiralla's defection was an impressive achievement on the part of Abdu'l-Baha and those loyal to him. The American Baha'is had been thrown into confusion by the dispute. Their former mentor and his teachings had been discredited. Their lord, Abdu'l-Baha, lived thousands of miles away in a remote part of the Turkish Empire. They had only a few typewritten copies of extracts from the Baha'i writings available to them in English. They didn't have local teachers. They had become members of a religion that was rooted in the alien culture and languages of the Middle East, but they now had little to guide them as to the doctrines and practices that they should follow. Stabilization was accomplished by a variety of means. First, Abdu'l-Baha's dispatch of a succession of 4 Iranian Baha'i teachers to provide the American Baha'is with a focus and source of Orthodox Baha'i belief between 1900 and 1905. Secondly, a vast interchange of correspondence between Abdu'l-Baha and his American followers. Thirdly, the pilgrimage journeys to Akka to visit Abdu'l-Baha by a small but influential minority of Baha'is. Fourthly, the publication of a substantial body of Baha'i literature in English, such that by 1912 at least 70 books and pamphlets had been produced, including translations of scripture, pilgrimage accounts, and expositions of the Baha'i teachings, and finally the emergence of a body of Native American Baha'i teachers and leaders. As the Baha'i movement recovered from the shock of 1900, it experienced a revival in numbers as disaffected members returned and new converts were made. Growth was much slower than it had been during the period of Kheiralla's leadership in the period before 1900, however, and by 1906 the Baha'is were still only able to report a membership of 1,280 to the American National Census. It's not clear yet why growth was so slow after 1900. Perhaps the more orthodox version of the Baha'i teachings was less appealing than Kheiralla's unorthodox synthesis, or perhaps the American Baha'is' efforts at propagating their beliefs were hindered by their lack of effective organization, or by the factionalism and petty disputes that often dogged the movement. Certainly, the American Baha'is initially lacked a common focus apart from the distant figure of Abdu'l-Baha, and the Baha'i writings were subject to a variety of individualistic interpretations. Anyway, that's all I'm saying for the moment in this video. Next week we'll talk about the question of organization, Abdu'l-Baha's visit to North America in 1912, the war years, and activities outside the United States. For a general overview of Baha'i history, see the Babi and Baha'i religions, from Messianic Shiism to World Religion from Cambridge, and the Baha'i Faith, a short history from One World. More general accounts, we have Cambridge, an introduction to the Baha'i Faith, and One World's a concise encyclopedia of the Baha'i Faith. So many thanks to you for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons for their kind support and encouragement, without which these videos would be hard to make. And you're very welcome to support my channel. Like, comment, and share on the videos if you will. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. I'll give Patreon and PayPal links below. Next week we'll go on to part 2 of this topic, the initial establishment of the Baha'i Faith in the West up to 1921. Have a good day.